You're listening to nativetalk.net. Audio files are available online at nativetalk.net. If you listen to the whole show today, beginning to end, you'll become the first person to ever do it. And that's something you can brag about to your friends. Unless you're Cliff, and then you don't have any. Be a part of the program by emailing us, podcast@nativetalk.net. And now, your hosts, Cliff and Brandon. Crank it up and set off your airbag. What? Now grab your nets and let's go fishing.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today on the nativetalk.net radio program. The email, if you want to be a part of the show, is podcast@nativetalk.net. And as always, you can make comments through the Facebook page, facebook.com/Native Talk Radio. Now, Brandon is not here today. He's actually in the Tacoma, Seattle area, closing on his brand new house. He's moving up there, and he's also going to be diving for gooey ducks this week. So instead, we've got a PhD in, what do you have a PhD in, Miss Danelle?
I have a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of South Dakota.
Wow, you went all the way to South Dakota to study that?
I did, yes. It was the furthest I applied to go to school because I didn't want to be away from family, but that's where I got in. So you do what you have to do. So I went, and
that's what you do.
Came home with a PhD. That's right.
Well, that's pretty amazing. How did you like South Dakota?
At the time, it was pretty painful. It's cold, and then it's hot, and then it's cold again. But I learned a lot, and I've gone back actually and visited a lot of my professors since graduating. And my story is that I went home. It was like I was swimming upriver to kind of find myself and my purpose, which was to come back and serve my people. So it took me going all the way to South Dakota to really solidify that as a plan for me. So
sometimes that's just what it takes. I mean, I spent 5 years in Russia and before I came back to America. So sometimes you got to leave home to realize how much you're needed there.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, and you're back in Tacoma now, right?
Yes, I am. I am back on the reservation, the Puyallup Tribe of Indians reservation that Tacoma, Fife, Milton, and Puyallup sit on top of. And I have been serving the tribe in the capacity as director at Quapachi Counseling Center for 14 years.
Awesome. Now, the reason why you contacted me is because it is May is Mental Health Month, which was started in 1949 by Mental Health America, which is the most highly recognized mental health awareness event in the nation, which I thought was interesting because I've never heard about it before.
Yeah.
But I guess that's one of the reasons why they picked this month to release a bunch of studies and things so that people can be aware of it. The one thing that I never understood about awareness months and like awareness events is because obviously it's about something that most people know isn't good. I mean, it's not like it's a stretch of the imagination that mental disorders are a bad thing. It's something that we're all aware of. So, so people set up things like community runs or walks for mental health. They host mental health screenings, other educational events. They plan events where concerned citizens and community can come together to discuss, mental health needs and stuff. But the thing that always confused me is the people who are going to those events are usually not the people who are suffering from those, because if you have a mental health disorder, you're probably more likely to just stay at home. So you're not going to go get screened. You're going to stay out of the public. So how are these things helping is my question.
I think that's a great question, actually, Clifton. And it does bring up one of the themes for the national NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And they also, do national campaigns every year with different themes. And their theme this year is to actually #cure stigma. And so your question is perfect because a lot of times the folks who will show up at these awareness events, we will make assumptions they're doing better. They're coming because they know it's important. They're engaged. And the folks who really should be there maybe aren't as engaged. And one of the reasons we know that there folks with mental illness are not engaging in the community is for fear of being negatively judged, for fear of being seen as less than somebody else. And it is due to the misinformation about people who suffer from mental illness, that they are dangerous, that they're quote unquote crazy. And so it's those kinds of misinformations and things that are, and even that are in our everyday media. They love to jump on somebody had mental illness and went and, did a bad deed. So we have a long way to go in terms of these awareness events in order to, truly cure stigma, so that when somebody is suffering, they will, just like, I like to use the metaphor or the analogy, if I broke my leg or my arm and the bone was sticking out, it was a compound fracture and my hand was hanging, I wouldn't hesitate to go to a doctor.
But then I wouldn't also have like a stigma attached about that I'm less than somebody else, because if my arm isn't working, it is less than somebody else's. That's why I go to get help, so that I can return to full functionality.
Exactly. And there isn't anything that keeps you from making the obvious next step after the arm is broken to go see a doctor. It's a whole lot more complicated when you're talking about somebody who's suffering emotionally, and that whole overlay of how are people going to judge me? And especially in Indian country, stigma is everywhere, but especially in Indian country, it is even deeper. It goes back, generations. My, great grandma said, don't ever go to Kwawachi because, people are going to think you're crazy and that's a bad thing. So we need to overcome those, those teachings that we've all heard in our either family, immediate family, or in the community. And we need to give permission to everyone.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you said that there's a stigma that people with mental health problems are violent, unpredictable. And I've been researching and looking a little bit into this. And they say that most people with mental illness are not really violent. You've got about 3 to 5% of violent acts are attributed to individuals living with serious mental illness. So most violence isn't being perpetrated by people who are mentally ill. But people with mental illness are 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than someone in the general population. And that surprised me, because what are they doing out there to put themselves in a situation where they can be violently victim?
Yeah. I think that's super complicated. And a lot of our folks with mental illness, they are homeless. So that's, that is definitely something that co-occurs fairly often with people with chronic mental illness. They're also homeless. So they're living on the streets. And so we know that is not an easy life. And you're not running into the most healthy people. They're most likely stressed.
About a quarter of all homeless adults staying in shelters have a mental illness. That's a quarter of them.
Right.
That's pretty serious. You also mentioned the stigma attached with Indian country, and I was reading that they have a higher instance of mental health than any other race. They're at 28%, whereas white adults are living with a mental condition 19%, blacks 18%. I mean, everybody's about the 16 to 18%, except for natives, way up at 28, which is surprising to me, because why is it affecting them more than everyone else? I don't know.
Well, I mean, we have some good ideas. Science has come a long way even since I earned my PhD almost 20 years ago. And science wasn't looking at the impact of trauma across generations. Although I had met in South Dakota, I met some elders and also healers who said, we carry the wounds. I've heard this all through my time in South Dakota. We carry the wounds of our ancestors. And I really kind of never knew what that meant. I was like, okay. But now science has actually caught up with that teaching, that the elders in South Dakota, they just knew. And that we truly do, women in utero, if they experience any type of stress, and stress cortisol is released in in their body, it is actually passed down into her fetus, and that fetus will then carry that stress response like through life. And so the child could have a perfectly, because you and I touched base a little bit through messaging, like I kind of don't get it. And this, child can be born and never experience, strife or difficulties or anything. And yet through that experience in utero, they're going to have a slightly different than normal response to stress in their lives because of what happened to them in utero. And we also know that we do carry from generations past that same similar kind of neurological pathway for dealing with stress, and it can just put us in a slight disadvantage to getting through some of the things that we'll say, you use the word normal. I'm not sure there is a normal, but that normal folks can kind of see that stress through.
No,
right?
Normal just meaning like your average everyday person, somebody who's.
And I think we're all in a continuum, and everyone has their own flavor of crazy, is what I always say. In a good way. I have mine, and my sister has hers, and even though we grew up in the same family, we have kind of different ideas of what that was, because we're all individuals. And
that does bring me to something that I was curious about, because everybody knows that people who are facing serious situations, who've come from very stressful families, whether that's before they were born or they're living through it, they're going to be subjected to these things. We know that poverty and these things create more stressful situations, and certain areas things are more prevalent than others. But I've never understood the people who we see so often with mental health issues. They're people who should by all accounts be happy. There's nothing that you can point to, and it's not like it has a a serious or severe mental issue, but just a difficulty coping. And we see people who come from good families, good upbringing, they commit suicide, and it's happening at, like, from what I consider, ridiculous rates.
We are truly in a suicide.
Kids doing it. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death.
Yes.
And third for people aged 10 to 14, and second for kids aged 15 to 24. What on earth are children having difficulty coping with?
Yeah. Well, it's a complicated picture, but I think bringing up that and also suicide is the fourth leading cause of admits in the ER. So it is truly happening at an epidemic rate. And I saw a documentary that was done by now I'm forgetting her name, from Como. Anywho's, she interviewed a 9-year-old child who had tried to hang herself in her bedroom. And she was suffering because her parents were both out of the home. She was placed in her grandmother's care with several other siblings and cousins. They're in an impoverished, home with little resources, and a lot of sadness, in her life, missing her parents. And, there's lots of reasons. I mean, we look to, who's the person who played Mork?
Robin Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Robin Williams, like nobody would have guessed on this planet that he would have taken his life. Chris Cornell, from Soundgarden, these people who seem to be living these, Hollywood glamour, like what could possibly be wrong? They're the folks who are, again, they weren't seeking the help and support that they needed due to that stigma. So, you have somebody who already has a proclivity, both of them did, to addictive behaviors. They both admitted to having issues with being addicted to some kind of substance, and so they were using medications given to them by a PCP rather than maybe getting some more comprehensive services to address their mental health problems.
You like the drug PCP?
Well, most of the mental health medications for depression, anxiety, ADHD, they're prescribed by family practice docs.
Oh, okay.
And so, they're getting the medications, but they're maybe not getting that behavioral retraining that they need. A lot of children will grow up in systems by folks who, their parents aren't the healthiest, and so they're learning maladaptive coping strategies as well. So they grow up learning these maladaptive things, and from the youngest age, children start to connect with the adults around their lives. And if they're inconsistent, that child's going to have a really hard time, and even more difficulties as they get older if they're not learning the healthy ways to engage in their environment.
I completely agree, because medication can only go so far.
Right.
And it can only do so much.
Exactly.
In fact, on this show, we've been talking the last couple of weeks about how to have a more successful, organized, and happy life. Having a strong purpose in life is something that I believe in. I think that you need to set goals to be future oriented, thinking about like things that you want in the future. And if you're concentrating on what you want and setting very clear goals, it helps you make decisions today to make tomorrow's dreams a reality, because things don't just happen.
I love it.
If you're looking around just at what you've got going on in your world today, you're going to be lost.
Yeah. For sure, and these are teachings, our public school systems are changing, and have changed since, I went to school, and probably since you went to school. They don't teach values in school anymore. We're kind of losing our children, I would say, a little bit to technology and to screens. And that sense of purpose, I think, is the absolute, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head in terms of a driver for your wellness. Because if you don't have that, you don't have a driver, and nothing's kind of pushing that car, right? Or making your engine go. And I can't remember the title of the book, but they interviewed centenarians all over the world. And it was one of Oprah's favorite, like in her book club several years ago. And so the author went around all over the world and interviewed these people who had lived to be 100 full lives, and let's say happy lives. And the number one thing that every single person across the globe that had survived a lifetime and were living past 100 said the number one thing that linked them all together was purposefulness.
Absolutely.
And I don't think we do a good job of helping children to find that. I remember talking to teachers and people in school about, what do you want to be? What do you want to be? And when I ask teenagers today, we do a lot of outreach in our community here at the tribe, and I work with a lot of the students at Chief Leschi and students in our community and young people. And I'm like, what do you want to be? What's your dream? What do you want to be? And sadly, the most common response I hear is, I don't know.
That's sad.
I don't know. We're just not doing a good job of planting those seeds.
When I was about 13 years old, and my dream was always, I wanted to be in radio. I loved radio. I used to listen to radio stations and shows all the time. And to me, it sounded like those guys were having fun. And I always said I wanted a job where I can have fun. And so I've told this story before. I used to call my local radio station, country station, I can't remember, but it's a country station out there in Sacramento. And I called them every day asking if I could be a guest on the air. And it took me 2.5 months calling them every day until they let me be on as a 13-year-old. I got to go into the studio and that
is awesome. That's awesome.
And when I got to college, I entered an internship program, and I got to intern at KSFM there in Sacramento, and I got to be on the 7 to midnight show, and I got my own overnight show. I did a morning show down in New Mexico. So, if you're
living your dream, right?
If you have that dream, and you're doing things to make that become a reality, you'd be shocked at how often it's going to come true.
Right.
Right. And the fact that it's hard, of course it was hard. Who else would call for 2.5 months? And, after that, they started having guest DJs every Friday night.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, you are living your dream. That's really, really cool. Yeah. I love it.
Well, now I manage hotels, but, I still do stuff like the podcast.
And you're doing this, and I, like, way back when I was growing up, probably about that same age, my dream changed. I wanted to be a fashion designer. I wanted to be an a pilot, but I was continued to make those steps, which included graduating from high school and then going to college, and and then it morphed into, I want to be able to help my people. That's what I could articulate going into my University of Washington for my bachelor's degree, is I want to help my people.
It's okay if dreams change. That's normal.
They change.
But you got to have something.
We don't give our kids permission to dream anymore.
I've always thought that happiness, if you want to define happiness, whether or not you're happy, I believe that it's a progressive realization of a worthy ideal, something that you're working towards. So when you have clear goals that you're moving towards, you're not only going to be more successful in your life, but you're going to be just generally happier, which is why I thought it was interesting. There was a huge study done, just got released yesterday.
Oh boy, you did your homework. You did good.
Yeah, it's from insurance company Stigma, who reveals that loneliness is at absolutely epidemic levels in America. I got to take just a quick little break, and we'll be back with to talk about that in just a minute here on the nativetalk.net radio podcast.
You're listening to nativetalk.net. We listen to the other guys. That's why we don't imitate them. Now, grab your nets and let's go fishing.
Hi, this is Cliff.
And this is Brandon.
And this is the